The walls of Vargfjell have cracked, and the wolves of war are at the gate. The siege that lasted 7 years now rushes toward its brutal climax, and within the doomed fortress, warriors prepare for their last stand. King Hroald's vengeance is at hand, and his warriors, restless from years of waiting, are ready to claim what they believe is theirs: gold, blood, and the death of all who defied them. The north will burn, and the gods will watch, as they always have, with cold indifference. Yet fate is not done weaving its cruel tapestry. As fire and steel consume the stronghold, as shieldmaidens and berserkers fall beneath the tide of battle, 2 warriors find themselves at the edge of ruin. Torhild and Sigmund, once bound by trust, then torn apart by war, must now face a choice greater than victory or defeat. But the gods are not yet finished with them. What lies beyond the Fall of Vargfjell is not only the end of a siege, but the beginning of a saga that will be sung for generations to come. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is the final part of our story, the Siege of Vargfjell, a tale of honor and ruin. Episode 2, The Fall of Vargfjell. Chapter 5, The Dying Light. The stronghold of Vargfjell was burning. Smoke coiled through the frozen air, thick and choking, blotting out the stars. The scent of blood and charred wood mingled, the iron stench of death rising from the battlefield. The warriors of King Hroald flooded through the broken gates, their war cries shaking the stone as they butchered the last remnants of Jarl Eirik's defenders. Vargfjell, the fortress that had stood defiant for 7 years, had fallen. And upon the blood-stained ground, 2 warriors lay dying. Torhild drifted between worlds. The pain in her side was distant now, lost beneath the tide of her slowing heartbeat. Her fingers, still curled around the hilt of her sword, felt numb. She was on her back, staring at the sky, but the sky was wrong. It was not the sky of Midgard. It was dark, swirling, shifting. Shadows moved within the clouds, twisting and coiling like living things. And then, a voice. "Rise." Torhild tried to move, but she could not. The voice came again, deep as the roots of Yggdrasil, cold as the grave. "Rise, shieldmaiden. Your war is not yet done." A face loomed above her, pale and terrible, a woman with eyes like frozen lakes and lips black as night. Hell. Torhild tried to speak, but her voice was only a whisper. "Am I dead?" A faint smile touched Hel's lips, though there was no warmth in it. Not yet. Torhild's vision blurred, the battlefield wavered, and suddenly she was standing before Hel's great hall. Its doors yawned open, a cold wind spilling forth, carrying with it the echoes of voices long lost. Hel studied her with interest. "You were fated to die this night, and yet you linger." Torhild's breath came in ragged gasps. "Then let me pass." Hel tilted her head. "Not yet," she murmured. "The game is not yet played. Your tale is not yet sung." Torhild's pulse quickened. The words rang in her mind like a warning. "What do you want from me?" Hel's smile widened, and for the first time, Torhild saw something beneath the cold exterior, a glint of amusement. "Not I, shield maiden, but the gods above still watch, and their hands are upon your fate." The vision shattered. Torhild gasped, the taste of blood flooding her mouth. She was back upon the battlefield. The sky was dark with smoke. The fires of Vargfjell burned around her, and Sigmund Wolfsbane lay beside her, barely breathing. Sigmund's breaths were slow, unsteady. The sword buried in his ribs still trembled. He turned his head, his gaze locking with Torhild's. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, at last, Sigmund chuckled. "It seems I should have aimed for the heart after all." Torhild let out a weak breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "You were always a fool." Sigmund coughed, blood running down his chin. "And yet, here we are." The sounds of battle raged around them. The warriors of King Hroald stormed through the halls of Vargfjell, cutting down those who still resisted. The banners of the Jarl were torn from the walls. The great feasting hall, where once laughter and mead had flowed freely, was now a slaughterhouse. Sigmund exhaled slowly. His fingers twitched against the blood-stained ground. "Do you remember," he murmured, "when we fought side by side?" Torhild's vision blurred. She did remember. Years ago, before this war, before the siege, before Hroald's conquest had turned them against one another. "I remember," she whispered. Sigmund closed his eyes. "A strange thing," he muttered. "To die like this." Torhild's breath hitched. Hel's words echoed in her mind. "Your tale is not yet sung." A choice stood before her. Let Sigmund die. Let herself die. Let Vargfjell's story end in blood and ruin. Or, she gritted her teeth, not yet. With the last of her strength, Torhild reached for Sigmund's axe. She grabbed its haft, pressed it into his hand. His eyes fluttered open, confusion flickering across his face. Torhild swallowed the pain, forcing herself onto her knees. "Get up." Sigmund groaned. "Are you mad?" "Perhaps." She grabbed the hilt of the sword still buried in his ribs. "You'll die here if you don't move." Sigmund exhaled sharply, eyes darting between her and the burning ruins of the fortress. For the first time since this war began, Torhild and Sigmund stood together once more. Enemies no longer, survivors. From the heights of Vargfjell, King Hroald watched his victory unfold. The stronghold was his. Jarl Eirik had fallen, cut down in the last desperate defense of his keep. The warriors of Vargfjell had been slain or captured, their banners trampled beneath his boots. It should have been a moment of triumph, and yet something gnawed at him. He turned to Gunnar the Blacktooth, his closest captain. "Find Wolfsbane," he ordered, "and bring me the head of Torhild." Gunnar grinned, already gripping his blade. "It will be done." As he strode toward the battlefield, the ravens of Odin circled overhead. And deep beneath the world, in the halls of the dead, Hel smiled. The game was not yet over. The saga was far from finished. Chapter 6. The Flight of the Wolves. The ruins of Vargfjell smoldered, embers flickering like the last breath of a dying beast. The banners of Jarl Eirik had been torn down, his stronghold reduced to a graveyard of warriors and a prize of conquest. But beneath the rising smoke, two shadows moved. Torhild gritted her teeth against the pain, pressing a bloodied hand to her wounded side as she pulled Sigmund forward. He was still weak, barely standing, but he lived. And for now, that was enough. They had no time for rest. King Hroald's men were hunting them. Far above, upon the ruined parapets of the fortress, Gunnar the Blacktooth watched like a wolf on the prowl. His men scoured the corpses, turning over the fallen, looking for the lifeless body of Sigmund Wolfsbane. They had not found him. Gunnar's lips curled. The bastard still breathes. King Hroald's orders had been clear. Sigmund's head was to be brought before him, and Torhild's body was to be left for the crows. Gunnar gripped the hilt of his axe. He would see the will of the king done. His eyes narrowed as he spotted movement below, a flicker of motion in the shadows of the lower courtyard. Two figures slipping toward the old stone tunnels beneath the keep. A slow grin spread across his scarred face. They run. He turned to his men. Find them. The warriors fanned out, boots crunching over broken shields and shattered bodies. The hunt had begun. Torhild pressed forward, half dragging Sigmund through the crumbling corridors of Vargfjell's lower levels. She knew these halls. She had walked them as a child. She had bled in them as a warrior. And she knew they led to one final escape. The old tunnels, she murmured, half to herself, half to Sigmund. Sigmund grunted in response. His breath was ragged, his wound still fresh, but the fire had returned to his eyes. His warrior's will had not yet broken. The tunnels had been carved centuries ago, winding beneath the fortress like the roots of a great tree. They were narrow, dark, and dangerous, but they led to the fjord below, to freedom. Torhild paused as she heard footsteps behind them. Too many, too close. They know we're here, Sigmund rasped. Torhild nodded grimly. Then we make sure they regret it. She pressed him toward the tunnel's entrance. Go. Sigmund's eyes flickered with something unreadable. You mean to stay? She shook her head. I mean to buy us time. He hesitated. For the first time since this war had begun, he hesitated. Torhild's grip tightened on her sword. Move, Wolfsbane, or I swear by the gods, I will leave you here to die. Sigmund exhaled sharply, but obeyed, disappearing into the shadows of the tunnel. Torhild turned, blade in hand, and faced the coming storm. Gunnar found her waiting. He stepped into the torchlight, his axe resting against his shoulder, his grin sharp as a blade. Well, well, he mused, the wolf's bitch stands alone. Torhild did not rise to the insult. She only raised her sword. Come and find out how deep my fangs bite. Gunnar laughed. Oh, I've been waiting for this. The warriors behind him moved forward, but Gunnar held up a hand. Number, she's mine. The men stepped back. Gunnar lunged. Torhild met him with steel. The first clash rang through the tunnels, the force of the blow rattling her bones. Gunnar was stronger, his attacks brutal and unrelenting. But Torhild was faster. She twisted, dodging his next strike, her blade flashing as she cut across his arm. Blood splattered the stone. Gunnar snarled, eyes burning. That all you've got, shieldmaiden? Torhild didn't answer. She only struck again. The fight was quick, brutal, relentless. But Torhild was already wounded, her body failing her. Gunnar was fresh, strong, ready. His axe caught her across the ribs, sending her stumbling back. She hit the wall, gasping for breath. Her vision swam. Gunnar loomed over her. The killing blow was coming. Torhild did not close her eyes. Then, a shadow moved behind Gunnar. A blur of steel, a flash of red. Gunnar stiffened. Then Sigmund Wolfsbane's axe burst through his chest. The warlord choked, blood spilling from his lips. His fingers twitched. Sigmund wrenched the axe free. Gunnar fell. For a moment, the tunnel was silent. Then Sigmund exhaled, wiping the blood from his face. Did I not tell you? He murmured. You should have run. Torhild chuckled, a painful rasping sound. And you should have left me. Sigmund offered her his hand. She took it. They had no time to waste. More would come. Together, they disappeared into the darkness. Above the world in Asgard, Odin watched. His ravens whispered. The tale was not yet done. Loki lounged in the shadows, his smirk sharp as a blade. Oh, but this is fun. Odin did not answer. His single eye remained fixed on the two warriors below, their fates now tangled beyond all reckoning. And far beneath, in the halls of the dead, Hel smiled. Run, little wolves, she whispered, for the hunt is far from over. Chapter 7. The Path of the Dead. The tunnel opened to a frozen fjord, its waters black beneath the shrouded sky. Smoke from Vargfjell's ruins still curled above the cliffs, twisting like the fingers of a dying god. The tide lapped softly against the shore, but there was no peace in its whispers, only the silence of a land that had lost its warriors. Torhild and Sigmund staggered onto the shore, their bodies broken, their breath heavy. Blood trailed behind them, marking their passage like the footprints of the doomed. Torhild pressed a hand to her side. The wound was deep. She had no illusions. She was dying. Sigmund too was failing, his strength sapped by the wound she had given him. It was a strange thing, for enemies to flee together, but war had stripped them of everything else. Now, they had only each other. The ravens had followed them. Torhild saw their black forms circling above, their cries sharp as steel, Odin's messengers, watching, waiting. Sigmund's voice was hoarse. There's a boat. Torhild turned. Half buried in the icy sand lay an old fishing skiff, its wood cracked with age, its oars missing. But the hull was intact. It would float, if the gods willed it. Torhild exhaled. We take it. Sigmund frowned. And go where? She met his gaze. Where the gods cannot find us. Sigmund let out a hollow laugh. There is no such place. But he did not argue. Together, they pushed the boat into the water. The tide carried them into the fjord, the currents pulling them toward the open sea. The wind was cold, but the silence was colder. Torhild leaned against the wooden edge of the boat, her breath shallow. Her strength was leaving her. Sigmund watched her. You need a healer. Torhild smirked, though there was little humor in it. Then find me one in Hel's halls. Sigmund's grip tightened on the oar. You won't die. Torhild sighed. We are all dying, Wolfsbane. The boat rocked, the tide shifting beneath them. Then the air grew heavy, the wind stilled, the water darkened, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. And from the mist, a figure appeared. A boat, black as night, drifted toward them, its sail tattered, its oars moving though no hands guided them. At its bow stood a man wrapped in shadow, his face hidden beneath the hood of a tattered cloak. His hands were pale, bony, unliving. Torhild's breath caught. Sigmund reached for his axe. The figure raised a hand. You stray from the path of men, he intoned. His voice was like wind through a graveyard. You stand upon the threshold of death. Torhild swallowed hard. Who are you? The figure did not move. I am the ferryman, and you are already mine. The air was thick with the scent of brine and decay. Torhild's grip on her sword tightened. We do not seek hell's halls. The ferryman's unseen eyes seemed to bore into her. And yet you drift ever closer. Sigmund stepped forward, his axe ready. If you have come for our souls, then come and take them. The figure tilted his head, almost amused. You think steel can slay death? The boat rocked beneath them. The water beneath their skiff darkened, no longer sea, but something else. Torhild's pulse quickened. What do you want? The ferryman's voice was calm. A bargain. Sigmund growled. We have nothing to offer. The ferryman raised a skeletal hand. One of you will not leave this water alive. That is the price. The words hung like a noose. Torhild inhaled sharply. She knew what this was. The gods had written their fates already. This was merely the final test. Sigmund turned to her. His expression was unreadable. Torhild exhaled. Take me then. Sigmund's brow furrowed. No, she smiled weakly. We both know I'm not making it through this. The ferryman remained still. The choice must be made freely. Sigmund clenched his jaw. Torhild had always been the stronger one, the unyielding one, the one who never bent even before death. And yet, he could not let her go. For the first time in all his years of war, Sigmund Wolfsbane did not know what to do. The mist swirled, the ravens circled overhead. The ferryman waited, and the gods watched. One life, that was the price. One would walk away, one would not. Torhild's hand reached for Sigmund's. The touch was light. A final gesture, a farewell. But before either could speak, the boat lurched violently. Something moved beneath the water. A whisper, low and insidious, curling through the mist. The ferryman's head snapped toward the sound. No, he murmured. Not yet. Torhild's breath caught. Sigmund grabbed his axe, and then the water erupted. Chapter 8. The Judgment of the Gods. The sea erupted. Dark waves crashed against the two boats, spraying salt and shadow into the air. The mist curled like grasping fingers, thickening, deepening, swallowing the world in an abyssal gloom. The waters, once black and still, now churned with something unseen, something old. Torhild gasped, gripping the wooden edge of their skiff as it pitched violently. Sigmund reached for her, his axe still clutched in his other hand. But the ferryman did not move. Instead, he turned his hooded head toward the water. And for the first time, his voice was laced with something other than indifference. They come. The waves buckled. A shape rose from the deep. First came the stench, the smell of rot, of death, of things that had sunk into the abyss and never returned. Then, through the mist, eyes gleamed, glowing, unnatural. And then, the beast surfaced. A serpent, vast as the sky, its body coiling through the waves like a living current. Jörmungandr. The Midgard serpent had come. The ferryman stood motionless, his tattered cloak billowing in the unnatural wind that swept across the sea. The presence of Jörmungandr had turned the world silent, as if even death itself had been forgotten. Torhild felt it in her bones. This was not meant to happen. She and Sigmund were caught in something beyond mortal reckoning. The war, the siege, the betrayals, all of it had been the will of men. But this was the will of something greater. The serpent's head loomed above them, its massive coils shifting beneath the water, stirring the depths into a roiling abyss. Its golden eyes gleamed, filled with the weight of ages. And then a voice rumbled, not from the serpent, but from the sky itself. "Enough!" The air shuddered, the mist burned away, and above them, Odin appeared. The clouds split like a wound in the sky, and the one-eyed god stepped forth. He was not like men, not like warriors. He was something else entirely. Wrapped in a cloak of midnight, his single eye burned with the fire of knowledge, and his spear, Gungnir, hummed with unspent wrath. His ravens circled above, their wings blotting out the stars. The Midgard serpent did not move. The ferryman lowered his head, and Torhild dropped to one knee. Sigmund, though bloodied and broken, followed her lead. Odin's gaze swept across them, first to Torhild, then to Sigmund, then to the ferryman, who remained still as the grave. "You would dare take what is mine," the god murmured. His voice was quiet, too quiet. The ferryman did not raise his head. "All men must pass through my waters." Odin stepped forward. "And yet, their fates are not yours to claim." Torhild's pulse pounded. This was no mere encounter. This was a reckoning. The All-Father's gaze fell upon her. "Do you understand, Shieldmaiden?" Torhild's throat was dry. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to look into the eye that had seen all things. And in that moment, she understood. This was never just about her, never just about Sigmund. They were caught in a story that had been written long before they were born. And now, the gods had come to claim their due. Odin turned to the ferryman. "You have overstepped." The ferryman did not argue. "I serve the balance." Odin's expression was unreadable. And yet, the balance has not yet tipped. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Odin turned his gaze back to Torhild and Sigmund. He studied them, weighing them, judging them, and then he spoke. "You will not go to hell this day." Torhild exhaled, her heart hammering. Sigmund, beside her, barely breathed. Odin's words were final, an unbroken decree, but the Allfather was not done. "Your fates remain unwritten, but know this." His gaze darkened. "The gods do not give without taking in return." Torhild clenched her jaw. "Then what must we give?" Odin's single eye gleamed, and he smiled. "You will know when the time comes." Then, with a flick of his spear, the storm broke. The Midgard serpent sank back into the abyss, its golden eyes watching as it vanished beneath the waves. The ferryman's boat drifted backward, swallowed by the mist once more, silent as a passing ghost. And Odin was gone. Only the sky remained, dark and cold, as it had always been. The saga continues. Torhild stared at the empty sky. Sigmund's breath came heavy beside her. They were alive, not by chance, not by fate, by the will of the gods themselves. She let out a slow breath. "We should be dead." Sigmund gave a weak chuckle. "Then let's not waste the gift." Torhild turned toward him, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "The gods do not give gifts, Wolfsbane." Sigmund nodded grimly. "Number. They do not." The tide carried them forward. To where? They did not know. But one truth remained. They had not been spared for nothing. Their war was not over. The story was not yet done. Far above, unseen and unheard, the gods watched. And somewhere in the shadows of fate, Loki smiled. The game was not yet played. Torhild and Sigmund have escaped death itself. But Odin's words still linger. A price remains to be paid. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to the final part of story, The Siege of Vargfjell, a tale of honor and ruin. Episode 2, The Fall of Vargfjell.